do this. Thank you, everyone who has joined us. This is the second in the Justice Teams Network series, We Take Care of Us. Last week, we featured Asantua Boykin, a member of the Anti-Police Terror Project in Sacramento, talking about their mental health response model, MH First, which is working to respond to mental health crisis without law enforcement. We know from the data that the only way to reduce the numbers in terms of when police kill, steal, or incarcerate our loved ones is to decrease the amount of contact that our communities have with law enforcement. And so this series is dedicated to highlighting organizations and programs that are working to respond to community crisis with community and not law enforcement. And so I'm really excited because the last 2 years, we have been building an amazing relationship with an amazing organization in Southern California called the Youth Justice Coalition. Our panelists today, I don't think they were old enough then to be part of YJC, but when I worked at Community Coalition over a decade ago, partnered with YJC on a few very important initiatives, one of which being getting A to G being the default curriculum for LAUSD so that Black and Brown students have the same access to the UC system as other kids. So anyway, I've been tracking this organization for a long time. It's been a real honor and a privilege to work with them over the last couple of years and meet their new staff and see their young leadership made up of impacted community members that are taking the lead in creating policies and practices that actually keep our communities safe. So I'm not gonna babble on for too long. I'm gonna turn it over to Ellie. Hi, Ellie. Thank you so much for joining us.
What's up, Kat?
Hey, you looking fly in quarantine. Look at you, them earrings are bad.
Thank you.
And also Anthony, who's another program coordinator with YJC. Good afternoon, Anthony.
My bad, I'm mute. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon.
Really glad. So I don't. Good to see you too, my friend. So I'm not sure how y'all want to rock with this, but I'm gonna turn it over to you to talk about the different programs of CAT 911, and then I will ask a few probing questions, and then I'm gonna turn it over to our beautiful audience to be able to ask questions for y'all to answer. So Ellie, you know, girls got to stick with girls, so I'm gonna rock it over to you. Why don't you kick us off and talk about CAT 911?
What's up? Yeah. So everybody, my name is Ellie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a youth organizer with the Youth Justice Coalition, and I'm also the Stop Coalition coordinator. So the Stop Coalition stands for Stop Terrorism and Oppression by Police. It's a coalition led by families impacted by police violence. So all of us have had loved ones killed by law enforcement. And that's kind of how we, met APTP, CAT, Annie, and other folks on that we have been building this relationship with. But yeah, for the past couple of years, we've been working on CAT 911, which is short for Community Alternatives to 911. And I can give a brief general overview of what we are, who we are, what we do, and all of that good stuff. So we're trying to build a LA county-wide network of teams that operate as a community alternatives to 911 by being the first responders to our community. So, every community is different, and we are the best people that know the ins and outs of what our community needs, what resources our community needs. So we've been, we have identified the following tracks. Sexual assault, mental health crises, first aid / wound care. So we have been offering, before the pandemic, we were offering monthly trainings for everybody in LA County to build up those skills and present, and it's just skill building in these different areas so that we can go back into our own communities, wherever our communities are, and really try to build up these teams. So I'll just pause there. I don't know if you want to add anything else onto that, Anthony?
Could you just repeat the focus areas again? Because your internet kind of went out. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
but
Yeah, so the 5 different tracks that we have identified are like peace building, um, police accountability / like cop watch, domestic violence and sexual violence, mental health crises, and first aid and wound care. So these are the 5 different tracks that we have identified in the focus areas. So every month we offer trainings in these areas. And all of this work is rooted in, we use a transformative justice lens and use TJ principles. We recognize that there is an immediate need for safety, but there's also a long-term goal for healing and, moving away from the reliance on law enforcement. So.
And yeah, I would just add for I'm not sure who is all on here, but I'm sure you're all like aware of like why the reasons why our communities feel there's a need to respond to these type of situations and these emergencies and these crises without the intervention of law enforcement, because law enforcement tends to exacerbate situations or make situations violent that don't need to be violent. And also they separate families. So, they like at the very least they don't do anything. So if there's a situation going on in the neighborhood, especially if you're in like the hood, they won't come to respond. Even if you call them, they won't even come. Many times won't come to respond. Or at the very most they'll do is just take maybe just write down the situation, but won't ever follow up. So a lot of people feel like the police, like in the hood, police don't protect them, that they're only there to arrest them. And it's very true for many of us. And then on the other flip side, when they actually do something and intervene, they usually make the situation worse and usually escalate situations instead of de-escalating situations. So we know like up to a third of people in LA County who are killed by law enforcement are experiencing some kind of mental health episode. Or like as I was growing up, and this is true for many households with mixed status families, with some family members who are undocumented, like if there's a domestic violence situation, with say a man is hitting his wife or something, the cops will get involved. They'll take the person that hit the other person to jail, and then if they don't have citizenship status, then they'll get deported. And that actually happened in my family where my dad was deported. And so many times people want to fix and end domestic violence, but without the use of cops, because the cops just make it worse. They sometimes might even end up beating up one of the parents in front of the kids, and then they take the parent away. And what families want is their families to be united, their families to be together and work through their issues. But the cops don't really do that. They just separate families. So this is why there's such a need or an urgency for us to create response teams that don't involve law enforcement, that actually bring real solutions that come from people who've been through those situations and experience these type of things and actually work in these fields, whether it's like a public health lens or any other type of lens. So that's not punitive and criminalizing. So that was like kind of the reasoning behind we wanted to develop this CAT 911. And we started it kicked off officially about a year ago, almost a year ago to this date.
It's been a year.
It feels much longer. But we were planning a 2-day conference for a while, for like 2 years. We were planning a conference and things would always just come up and things would happen and it would just fall apart. But finally we started planning this conference. We wanted to bring people together to start to get some build skills and learn from some workshops in these different areas. And also to start like a CAT 911 hub where people could build their own teams and they could learn these different skills periodically, like every month at our space. And we hold these meetings, and they could go back into their own communities or their own schools or their own places of work or their neighborhoods and build up their own teams and teach these skills. So it's like train the trainer type stuff and build their own teams and have this like decentralized kind of model. throughout the county. So we were planning it, and we finally had a date, and it was like April, end of March or like early April. And then we got evicted from our space. We got displaced through gentrification, and we knew it was coming, but we never knew what date it was because the county would never tell us what date they were actually going to kick us out. So we finally, after 2 years of struggling to get this conference organized, we had a date, and then they tell us at the last minute, "Oh yeah, we're taking the building on next month. You have to get out." So we had to postpone it again, and so we moved into our new space, which is it used to be the Kenyan Juvenile Justice Center. It was an old juvenile court in South Central, off 76th and Central. We moved into that building, and we had the conference sometime in May. So it's been about a year, and that's when it kicked off. Just a little bit of history behind our building. As Ellie said, like the Cat 911 teams use like transformative justice as like the foundation. And I think part of transformative justice, like the word transform is in there. So it's about like transforming what was old and what was harming us and transforming it into something new, and that's healing. And that's what we've done with this space, this new space that we're in. It used to be a site, used to be one of the busiest, if not the busiest, juvenile court in all of the nation at one point. Part of the largest network of juvenile courts and juvenile halls and camps in the nation, which is the LA County juvenile justice system, injustice system, is the largest in the nation. And even though it's significantly downsized, it's still the largest and still locks up the most youth in the world. So we took over that building. YJC actually helped organize to shut it down about 7 years ago, and it was just sitting there for 6 years collecting dust. The county didn't invest in it, didn't turn it into a youth center, didn't turn it into a library, didn't turn it into all the affordable housing, things that the community needs. It was just sitting there collecting dust on the corner. And when we got kicked out, that was the building we took over. Now we still have the courtrooms, we still have the holding tanks, which and some cells. There's a couple cells, and we still have that. We use that as a museum and kind of just commemorate the history, and just to know that this is what LA County LA County used to treat young people and how it still does treat young people. And this is like the fight. This is what we're fighting. But we have a school. We run a school out of there, a high school for young people who've been pushed out of their traditional schools. And this is where we had our Cat 911 conference, and this is where we have our trainings inside of a courtroom, actually. So we have Cat 911 trainings as alternatives to police, alternatives to the traditional system inside of a former courtroom. So it's pretty, it's like poetic justice, I guess we call it. But yeah, so that's just some of the history behind the Cat 911 and why I wanted to create it. And it's really taken off, and there's a lot of energy around it. There's a lot of people that come from all over the county that drive like 30, 40 minutes. And people, if you've been to LA, you know how the traffic is, you know how big the county is. Not even just the city, the county. People come from different parts of the county to come learn and try to build their teams up. So yeah, so that's just a little bit of history. And I don't know if there's anything else. I don't know, maybe we could talk about any kind of like successes and challenges that we've had, or if we just want to go to questions, because I'm sure people have good questions too.
Yeah, I think maybe just like pausing there and seeing if you have any questions, Kat, or anybody have questions in the chat.
Look at Anthony and Ellie trying to run my interview. They are amazing organizers and amazing leaders doing amazing work, and I'm so glad to have you as part of this series. So yeah, let's get into some questions. I'm gonna do sort of like I do my radio show. I'm gonna ask y'all some questions, and then there's some questions coming from the audience. And actually, the first question that we got from our audience today was something I had on my list, which was, how did you identify the 5 areas? Ellie, you alluded to some of that in a response on the chat, but talk about why mental health, why substance abuse, why intercommunal violence, why these 5 areas. And then if you could break down a little bit between you and Anthony around not just why these 5 areas, but what does the model look like? So, okay, there's a mental health call. What are you training community to do? Okay, there's street beef happening. What are you training community to do?
Anthony, do you want to maybe start it off, since you started talking about like the history of like how about Kenyan court? Can you maybe talk about like the peace building and like on like what happened the day that we got evicted in terms of like with the truce building and stuff at the old space?
Yeah. So the 5 focus areas came out of the what we were organizing the conference. We were organizing it with other community members. I think there's some on the part that are watching this that were part of the organizing of that first conference, and yeah, and basically, after a few meetings, we were trying to identify areas that really need a lot of alternatives to law enforcement or to typical responses. And so it was just natural that, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the streets. So it's like, how do we build up peace building on the streets, or what other people call like gang and street intervention? Obviously, the mental health crisis stuff is always apparent and always explicit, like, because we see the videos all the time of cops shooting unarmed people who are having mental health episodes, and we hear about it all the time. Obviously substance use, and with the growing rate of like people taking like opiates and stuff like that, it's always been an issue, but it's still an issue, and people are like scrambling to get Narcan in our communities and stuff like that. So when we hear stories of people dying, unfortunately, of overdosing on a lot. So there's been some young people recently, and some of the that we're connected to that have OD'd, unfortunately. So obviously domestic violence and sexual abuse, that's obviously a huge issue, always. And so that it came out of the organizing. These are the issues that people wanted to focus on, and we started identifying people that have done work in these areas. I don't know if you want to call them experts or call them whatever you want to call them, but people who have, clout in this work and really have been doing this work that can teach these trainings. It wasn't going to be us like teaching every training because we don't know everything. So we really started reaching out to like peace builders in the neighborhood that we know, to really start talking about how other people can build peace in their neighborhood when they go back. People that have worked in the mental health field for years and have seen a bunch of things and have different answers than the typical answers. So we started gathering different people from different areas in those subject areas for the conference to start teaching us to build skills in those areas. And one of the more apparent topics or subject areas for us, especially because where we're at, is peace building or like street intervention, because there's always stuff going on, and young people that we work with, always there's always stuff that they're either going through or whatever on the streets that we have to respond to, and that and sometimes we have to get other people involved to help just mitigate issues or build peace and make sure that our young people are safe and that things don't escalate, or if something happens within the school that doesn't escalate into the streets. So that's a very it's a topic, that subject area for us is really huge. And on the day we got evicted officially on March 31st from our old building. And that was the same day that Nipsey Hussle was killed right up the street. Our old building was on Florence and Crenshaw, and Nipsey Hussle was killed on Slauson and Crenshaw, which is the next main street, so just a couple blocks down. So it was like a sad day, but what happened after that is that different neighborhoods across Los Angeles started coming together for unity talks, and it started at our old site at Chuco's, because the county actually gave us another week to like move out. So as that was happening, that extra week, that building was being used to create peace on the streets at a level that wasn't seen since the 1992 LA rebellion, when there was the Watch Truce and all that. So that's pretty much what was happening, and that's what Nipsey Hussle's legacy and spirit kind of left behind, was this feeling that people need to come together, that the issues are bigger than because he was fighting against gentrification and white supremacy and things like that, and he was very vocal about it. What he left behind was people really kind of seeing that we need to look past our issues because there's something bigger. We have a greater enemy, and we need to fight the system in a different way because we're fighting each other. So that was kind of legacy that was left behind. And we moved into our new space, and then we had our Cat 911 conference. And so we've had elders and stuff from the community really bless us with their knowledge and their wisdom and their experience. And that legacy is still living on. It's still breathing, and it's still, all the work is still continuing in Los Angeles and in South Central. So that's, Ellie wanted me to talk about like what happened the day we got kicked out and why that was important. So I just wanted to tie that into the subject area question.
Thank you, Anthony. Talk about, I'm going to go back to Ellie, and you all can tag team however you want to, but talk about how COVID-19 has impacted your organizing. Like, how do you send boots on the ground to situations where you're trying to create, peace, or intervene in a mental health crisis, or even provide first aid when you're literally asking volunteers to put their lives on the line in this particular time?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, my internet's kind of like glitching. So I got kicked off a little bit earlier, but so COVID-19 has really impacted the work that we have been doing. So I saw this in the chat. So I do want to make the distinction that we are CAT 911 is not a rapid response team. We want to build up hold space and create just build skills so that we have the adequate skills and resources so that we are able to take those skills back into our own communities and be able to respond. So I do want to make that distinction. But I think in terms of like the monthly trainings that we were having before, we were having one monthly training, one training a month. I mean, we would alternate on the different tracks that I previously mentioned. But now in response to like, COVID-19, I mean, everything is on technology now. So we were like, how do we, still hold these trainings, and how do we, continue to build up these skills, especially right now? So there's been a shift. I mentioned also in the chat. So Lori asked if we have anything in regarding like children. So next week we're going to be having a webinar. Mireya, who's this amazing person, is going to be she deals with like mental health and specifically with children. So we're going to be having a webinar next week to talk about children and like mental health in response to the coronavirus and stuff. But with the work, I think just generally, it's been really tough because especially like where we're at, like in South Central, like a lot of the folks, like the students and other organizers were already really struggling before. And the pandemic has really, caused people to struggle a lot more. So people were struggling before to get access to like food, get access to like, technology, like whether it be like phones or whether it be, a computer, whatever. And the pandemic has really like, heightened that. So it's been really tough. And I think that we decided to host so we are no longer having these trainings once a month. We're having them every other week, just in to provide updates and provide different resources out to the community. We had our first webinar in Spanish 3 weeks ago, I want to say, and that one was directed for Spanish speaking folks that are undocumented, and we connected folks like with different like resources on like tenants rights and other issues. And we were, before the pandemic, we weren't offering we didn't have like the resources to provide anything like in Spanish. And so that was really dope that we were able to transition and be more like inclusive and regarding like language justice. So, and then on that same webinar, we actually had folks from up in the Bay. We had folks from San Diego. So we were able to reach a bigger capacity of folks that, previously when we were hosting these meetings in person, it was limited to like people just in LA County because we didn't have anything like online or anything. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I want to pause there. See if you want to add anything, Antonio.
Yeah, just that one of our core members is actually a nurse. I'm not sure if he's like a registered nurse or something. So he's on the front lines and has a lot of info on what's currently going on with this virus. So on the first CAT 911 COVID webinar, he gave a lot of info around like what's the facts and the myths, and what are like what kind of safety precautions we should be taking, which ones are kind of not correct to do and stuff like that. Just making things clear for everybody, so we can be safe as possible during this time. And yeah, and I would just quickly add, because I don't think we answered your last question completely, like around like you asked what are we actually training people to do, like say if they're responding to a mental health crisis, what are we training people to do? So like we'll have, say if it's like for a mental health crisis, we have trainings, and it'll be from somebody who has a lot of experience in that area and has insight and has specific trainings that they can lend to our communities. And so people from across the county will come and learn these skills so they can take them back to their communities. And like Ellie said, the CAT 911 hub is a hub. We're not like a response team ourselves. We're just like a hub. We're facilitating all these trainings and helping people build out their own response teams or hubs in their own communities, and trying to support them and give them the trainings and resources that they need to build it out wherever they go out to. Some people want to become a rapid response team, but we know like resources is hard, to respond to everything. So we're at least trying to build it out slowly.
Anthony, can I ask you why you all decided, I mean, I think that's an amazing model in terms of ensuring that communities far and wide can respond in the way their communities need to respond, right? Because no city, no town is the same. What was the process of deciding? So like, for instance, last week, we're talking about MH First, like that's a model, it's a team, and they go out. Why did you guys decide to be a hub as opposed to a team?
Because we do have like our own team within our own space in our area, but we wanted to, our end goal is to like ideally eliminate the need for police, and we can't do that if we're not helping others build up their own alternatives. And we also, LA County is so humongous, it's so vast. There's no way we don't have the resources or the infrastructure to do some kind of like centralized kind of response to the whole county, and like replace police and be alternative. So it's like we have to do it. We have to just be a hub and help people build up their own teams in their own neighborhoods, in their own communities or schools, and we could just provide whatever support resources we have, and to support them. So we did it because the county is so huge, and it would be pretty much impossible to do it like if we were just doing it ourselves. We have to let other people build up their own teams and have a place that they can go to really help facilitate their growth.
And then I just quickly want to add, if I can, that the goal, like at the end of the day, is like, to abolish like these systems. So not necessarily like to replace law enforcement, but being able to build up those skills so we don't have to rely on law enforcement, on the carceral system, on these systems in general. So that's like a long-term vision, and that's what we're working toward. That is like, so we can't talk about abolition and transformative justice without supplementing and providing these skills so that we are all confident not to call law enforcement, and I think there's I also want to make the distinction of like, we can't shame people for calling law enforcement when there's no alternatives, when we don't have the necessary skills or have different avenues so that we don't call law enforcement. So that's also like the thinking behind that, like supporting each other and like building up those skills so we don't have to rely on law enforcement or on like the systems in general.
Right. No, I'm really glad you said that, because following the murder of Oscar Grant and the movement that happened, that was a lot of the conversation, or a lot of the political struggle, I'll say, in the movement, was like the shaming of our community members for calling police. But it's like, well, we haven't done the job as organizers to build something else. So what are people supposed to do when they are in situations where they need support? Which is why these trainings and these systems that we're building in the community are so important. We have another question. What have been the challenges, successes, lessons when it comes to getting community members to use CAT 911 rather than call the police?
well, TJ is hard. Transformative justice is hard, you know? And especially like, I mean, it's hard in general. Like I've been a part of like circles, I've been a part of like TJ processes, and like that shit is hard. Like, you know, it's not, this work is not easy, and it's easier to talk about it in theory and talk about, sorry, my phone's connected to my computer. I lost my train of thought. It's easier to talk about like abolition and talk about these concepts in theory, but it's much harder to be, sorry.
Popular.
It's hard to put these, to use these, you know, concepts to actually practice this on a daily basis. So it's really one, like time consuming. And it's really intense. Like you really, like, you have to be really like dedicated to do this work. But it's been really dope to see like how folks are being able to you know, build up skills. Sorry. I mean, I'll pause there just in case this person calls again. Anthony, do you want to take over quick?
I think you pretty much said it. It's hard. It's hard to do in practice. And just making sure there's, people have said like, well, how do we, because there's not mass buy-in into abolishing police or transformative justice. So, and not only is there not mass buy-in, most people never even heard of it. So it's deeply ingrained in our beliefs that we need police, or that these are the only ways we can respond to different situations. Our imaginations have been cut off, you know, through the society that we live in. So I think what we tell people is, you know, people, like a common question is like, well, how do I get my grandma to believe and buy into this, or my brother or whatever? And it's like, or how do we get the larger community buy into it? And it's like, well, maybe you don't, but you're bought into it and you could practice it, and try to practice it in your household if you can. And little by little, 1 or 2 people might see it and get turned on to it. It's not going to happen overnight. So we can't worry about making sure the whole community buys into it, or the whole world buys into it, because it's not going to happen tomorrow. We know what it is, and we believe in it, and we're going to practice it. And that's what's going to make the difference, little by little, slowly but surely. And then more and more people start being aware of it and buying into it and start practicing it. So yeah, but there have been successes, especially with a lot of the energy and a lot of the people. We're kind of surprised at how many people are involved and are really excited about it and really believe in it. But it's also kind of sad, because it shows how messed up the state of where our communities are, where people are desperate to find alternatives to the norm, you know.
So I'm going to do some shameless plugging, but I'm gonna let you all do the shameless plugging, because we are partners on a statewide bill right now that would beef up the resources for more of these types of models to exist across the state. So can one of you talk about the Crisis Act, what it is and what we are trying to do, and what happened, the victory we had on Tuesday, thanks to you know, our great team, and Asanto Boykin, who is also on the call, and her amazing testimony about her work. What is the Crisis Act? Why does it matter? And what do we need people to do?
Thank you. I can definitely share. I'll do a super short, like, brief overview, because I know like legislation is really intense, and like if you're not like, you need to understand like the ins and outs. It's just a lot of information. So just to give like a really like short like summary. So the Crisis Act, it stands for Community Response Initiative to Strengthen Emergency Systems, and it's the number is AB Assembly Bill 2054. So it establishes a pilot like grant program to promote community-based responses to local emergencies or crises, and the 5 different focus areas are people experiencing homelessness, mental health crises, intimate partner violence, community violence, substance abuse, and natural disasters. And we had a really big win this past Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So it was actually, it came out of the Assembly governmental organization, I'm forgetting the acronym.
Government Operations Committee.
Yes, so it made it out. So we had, I believe it was 17 votes, 17 yeses. So it made it out. So it's now going to be going to the appropriations. So that's going to be a big hurdle, because that's where bills are pretty much like, costly bills are pretty much like sent to, like, in other words, like die there. But right now, like, I just really want really quickly want to highlight that, like, this bill and the mutual aid efforts, the solidarity that has been really, like, you know, skyrocketed during the pandemic is so amazing, because we see that, like, we have known, but the pandemic has really exposed how, like, the government really does not give a fuck about people. They don't give a fuck about Black and brown folks. They don't give a fuck about, you know, people that have been struggling, have historically been neglected. And the reason why people are, getting access to resources is because of the community efforts, because of the mutual aid efforts, not because the system is like taking care of people. Like, that's not the case. So this bill would really support that, and like really focus on like the community efforts and like building up those community-based alternatives, so that we don't have to, you know, rely on the, you know, crumbs that the government like tries to give us.
So along those lines, Ellie and Anthony, I'd be interested to hear your take on this too, because it's something that, you know, Anti-Police Terror Project struggles with, which is one of the anchor orgs of the Justice Teams Network, is why engage with the state at all? Like, why don't we just do grassroots organizing? Why policy? What is the importance of doing both and? Because we do both and I see you all very actively doing both and. Like, you have your own school, you're doing Cat 911, and you all are very active on the legislative scene. So talk about the thinking behind that, you know, dual pronged strategy.
You want to take it, Anthony?
Anybody.
I could just say that, yeah, it does seem like maybe counterintuitive or contradictory, but I think for us, it's, you have to dismantle something to build something, or to build something, you have to dismantle the system that we're currently in. And it's just impossible to build something on a scale that can replace what is here now, without a lot of resources. And so I think, and without changing what's currently going on, because there are a lot of immediate safety needs, there are a lot of immediate needs that need to be addressed now, and that just working on building an alternative won't address. So like, all of our people, all of our members, you know, we're all struggling with something, whether it's like incarceration or deportation or things like that, that need immediate relief from what's going on. And that requires you to engage with the state, to work on policy, to work on things, to change things the way they are now. But we're fully aware that this is not the long-term solution, that policy is not the vehicle that's going to liberate us. It's just to solve immediate needs now. And for like Crises Act, it's an opportunity for us to use taxpayer money that we're paying into through sales taxes, income taxes, to start funding community organizations to do work in a response to situations in a community-based way, instead of the police. So it's a huge opportunity, but I think we're all fully aware that this isn't like our long-term, this isn't like what our full vision is. Our ideal vision is not to have like a state-run alternative to policing. And it's not really going to be state-run the way I understand it. It's just going to be funded from the state, but ran by the community organizations on the ground that actually do the work. And obviously, state money could sometimes come with strings attached, and I think that's why people have done a lot of work on making sure that this money doesn't come with any strings attached, or people don't have to sell their soul or anything to do the work that they need to do. So I think it's just about responding to immediate needs, and then while we're also working on building alternatives, which is a much slower and longer process. And I was just gonna say, I have a video of our conference on YouTube that I wanted to share. So when there's time, I wanted to just see if I could share that little quick video.
Share your screen, homie. Make it happen.
Cool, thanks. Let me see. Hopefully the sound works. Take my headphones off.
While you get that started, Anthony, I did want to share. I put it on the chat. So again, the bill is Assembly Bill 2054. So AB 2054, and we are going to be needing letters of support from organizations, from people, because it's going to it's going to appropriations. So we're going to need a lot of folks' support, and so that it doesn't get killed. And we're going to really need to pressure, like, our representatives, because this, we really need, to fund more community-based organizations to continue doing this work. And we can definitely share that. We don't have the template finalized yet, but once we have it finalized, we can definitely share that out with folks. So we can, Annie and Kat are both part of that, the co-sponsor, so we can definitely share that out with folks.
Yeah, I was just gonna say right before you show your video, Anthony, that like you'll be able to get that template like on the YJC, social spaces, Justice Teams Network social spaces, Anti-Police Terror Project social spaces, wherever you're linked in terms of this conversation. And the second thing I was going to say is Ellie's right. Like, we're going to need a massive community push, because the line that the liberals and the right are going to use and already are using is that we can't do any bills that are not related to COVID. But this is related to COVID, because all of the crises that our communities were experiencing pre-pandemic are exacerbated post-pandemic. So when you're talking about domestic violence, right, we're not only seeing an uptick in calls, we're seeing an uptick in the intensity and violence of what's happening. When you're talking about housing and homelessness, right, we're talking about this virus spreading through our unhoused community. When you're talking about mental health, just think about yourself and the strain and the stress that this virus has put on you and your own dome, and what's happening in our communities, and where do people have to call. So we're going to need you not only to call and not only to send letters of support, but to really couch it in the framework of this is a response to COVID-19 for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities. So Anthony, it looks like you're ready to go. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Let me know if the sound's working, because I'm not sure if the sound is going to work. So. Oh, sorry. We just sit here back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the
So I couldn't hear, but the closed captions were great.
Damn.
No, the closed captions were great, and that was so inspiring. And you know, seeing some of the homies there, Muhammad and Nana, and the intergenerational presence of your work. And you know, I mentioned earlier that you know, I Community Coalition, which is right down the street from y'all, is my organizing home, and Black Brown organizing is no joke. For those of you who haven't done it. But it's so crucial to our liberation. And so I just want to commend you on all of that and the amazing work that you are doing. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to go back to something that you said, Anthony, and Ellie, you messed me up with that one. And that's about how do we convince others, because I'll never forget, you know, and by others, I mean in our community, right, our people, because I'll never forget the first case that APTP responded to, which was the murder of Guadalupe Ochoa. She was accused of stealing a vehicle, and she was chased by the San Leandro Police Department into East Oakland, pulled into a cul-de-sac. Her car was, you know, not facing the police, so her back was to the police, and they lobbed at least 45 bullets into her car. And that was our first responders moment. That was our first case. We were, you know, on the street and talking to neighbors, and we got cussed out by this older Black woman, right? She's like, "We need the police. You don't live here. You don't understand." And she said, "I didn't live in East Oakland. I mean, I lived in Oakland, but what, you know, you're not here when the bullets are flying, da 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 da." And of course, I didn't argue with her, right? Because that's not the job. The job is to meet our people where they're at. But it definitely really critically informed the way APTP's first response model is, and why we say, you know, our job is not to politicize people in the moment, right? Like our job is to serve them, and hopefully through the service that they get politicized, because we're offering them resources as they go, but not in the moment of trauma. So what are y'all's analysis around how do we talk to our people who are living in dire circumstances? We had a question earlier that was like, okay, well, who do I call if I get raped, right? Who do I call if someone, you know, molests my child? Who do I, and yes, these are the most extreme cases, but this is what our people think about. So how do you all address that issue?
I think that like this is a really important question, and it's tough. And I think at least for me, it's being undocumented. I've had the same conversation, like, you know, even like with my parents or with other family members that are undocumented, where, you know, they come to the U.S. We come to the U.S. and at least for me, like with my experience, like some of my family was like not appreciative, like very fond of law enforcement, because law enforcement here, because the law enforcement here seemed like less militarized, like less like corrupt than like what we had experienced like in, you know, in Mexico and stuff. So these conversations are hard to have, and it's just like, you know, at least for me, like being able to have these conversations like with my parents and like really like, you know, like, hey, like no, like they're still hella corrupt, they still don't give a fuck about us, like they're, you know, having those conversations has been really like vital. And you're right, it's not like our role to really like politicize in the moment, but to provide like the resources and like the skills to be able to move away from that mentality, and like to be able to shift and provide an alternative, like a alternative community-based ideas that, you know, programs that can really help push back on those narratives. But that's just like on like an individual, like, you know, level.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, Kat, you articulated what I was trying to say earlier a lot better. It's just like, it's not our job, or at least not our central job, to politicize people in the moment, but just to provide the resources, like Ellie was saying. And then people will see, like, so that's why when people ask, well, how do I get my family to buy into this and all that? It's like, maybe you don't. And maybe it's not your job to preach to them, like, why this is great and why this works, but to just do it, and do it where you can do it, and lead by example, and then they might buy into it. But I think, like, you know, some people will get put off if you come in there trying to like politicize people, especially during a crisis. That's the last thing you should be doing, is trying to convince people to believe in something when they're like, I need freaking help, like right now, can you help me? If not, just get out of my face. And that's understandable. I'm the same way. So, so yeah, I just think it's gonna take a while for this to really build out, but I'm very optimistic because of how many people aren't here. People that really believe that we do need alternatives and that are really working to build these alternatives. And then I seen a question earlier in the chat too that's kind of related to this question is so I think somebody asked like, have there been any like real life examples of this working for somebody? And it actually happened twice. When we first started doing these trainings, there was one training where it was mentioned that when somebody's hurt really bad or somebody's hurt or whatever, somebody's been shot, they don't want the police involved. You can call the fire department and they could get the paramedics out there without having police involved. So the very next week, somebody came to our training and said, hey, I wanted to share with you all. I was at last week's training and I wasn't gonna come to this week's training. I was just, tired, had a lot of stuff. But last night, somebody at the middle of the night, somebody just like in like 2-3 in the morning, somebody came knocking on my door and looked hurt, but I wasn't sure. They're kind of unsure about what this person's motives were, but they were saying that they were like hurt or something, if they could get them help and all this and let them in. And so what they did is they just told them, hold up. And instead of calling the police, they called the fire department. They said the paramedics actually showed up without the police, helped the person, and they left. And they're like, this actually worked. It's something I just learned last week. She's like, so I felt compelled that I had to come to this week's training and just stay involved. And then like that very next week, somebody else came because their sister had been coming to these trainings and been learning like de-escalation techniques when like, there's a conflict. And that person had kind of exploded, and they already know like when they explode, they can get violent and get physical, and that the sister had like really practiced a lot of de-escalation techniques with them and actually made them feel better and talk through what they were feeling. And so she was like, I need to start coming to these trainings because my sister did this and it worked. So there are successes, and those stories are what really like give me a lot of hope personally about what we're doing.
That's so beautiful. I'm glad that that's the note we're ending on. We have 60 seconds. All right. I'm going to ask you a question that's impossible to answer in 60 seconds. Talk about I'm alluding back to something that I mentioned earlier, because I just think it's so important as we move forward in this political climate. And so if folks can, hold on maybe a minute or two past 1 o'clock, the importance of Black-brown organizing in this political moment.
I'll let Ellie speak. I'll just quickly say, and we don't have a lot of time, that yeah, it's really important and critical in this moment, as it always is, but especially right now with these online videos and stuff and people online that aren't even close to the situation, exacerbating and fanning the flames. But there's also a lot of work that's going on in the community, that's going on at Chuco, to build these bridges. And we're at a place in LA that we've never been in terms of Black-brown solidarity, but we all know it's very fragile. And so there are people doing work that may not be getting a lot of attention or public media attention or social media attention, are doing the work to make sure that this unity is keeps building and is maintained. So we're hopeful it's happening, but it's always important because our main enemy is white supremacy, capitalism, and all that. So we have to keep our eyes on the larger vision, and that's what we strive to do every day. So it's critical right now.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know what I can add in like 10 seconds. But I just want to like really echo what Anthony said. Like our enemy is not like, Black and brown folks. Our enemy is like, white supremacy and like, the systems in general. And like there's been a lot of like frustrations right now because a lot of us, we're hella struggling. Black and brown folks are struggling. They have been, historically struggled. And right now the pandemic has really like, heightened all of that. So folks are, hella struggling, but right now it's like really important to maintain that, Black and brown solidarity and continue to work, because at the end of the day, like, we do outnumber like, these like rich, like white, like, cis folks up in power, So we definitely outnumber them, and we really got to keep working together to dismantle the system that has, oppressed us for, for a million years, you know? So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, you know, I was telling a story the other day on a panel. I could talk to you guys forever. I was telling a story the other day on a panel. I was 14. My dad had just got out of prison, and we were driving in the car. And I don't remember where it came from because I was born and raised in Las Vegas. And to this day, there's no politics in Las Vegas. And I remember I just had this thought, and I felt like it was like, you know, the universe or God or ancestors, whatever you know, look to, was prepping me for the work. And I looked at my dad, and I was like, you know, if Black folks, and I'm sure I didn't say brown folks because that wasn't the PC code or words back then, but whatever I said, if we could figure out that there's more of us than them and we came together, they'd be in fucking trouble, right? And that was me at 14. And so they know that. And so they actively work to pit us against each other so that we're distracted from, as Anthony said, the larger picture of who our really real enemy is. So inspired by you all. So grateful that you joined us today. Y'all, we've been talking to Anthony Robles and Ellie. I always get your last name wrong, and I can't see it because I'm getting old.
It's Virrueta.
Virrueta. Thank you. With Youth Justice Coalition, we will post this. So this was streamed on our Facebook, the Justice Teams Network Facebook page. We'll put it on YouTube. We will attach contact information because there were people that had direct questions for y'all in terms of things that are happening in Southern California. Thank you so much for joining us, y'all. And thank you so much for all of the work that you do. So much love and solidarity. And let's get this bill won.
Thank you, Kat, for having us. Really appreciate it, and for creating this space and for giving us this opportunity to share what we do. Really appreciate it, and love you all.
Anytime.
Teresa and Lori, I see you on there.
Stop Coalition in the house.
Yep.
Stay safe, be well. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye-bye.